You are now listening to the highlight reel builder for authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer and author of the best-selling book, Stay the Course, Dom Reitman. And you're going to be getting some goodies today from the guest that's up next. And today on the Going North podcast, where we bring you some fabulous humans from across the globe. Today is another one of those special occasions because we got a local author bonus special, baby. A Charm City bonus author featured during the illustrious Black History Month, baby, because we got one heck of a guest for you. A returning guest and one of the most illustrious guests to appear on this show because not only is he a doctorate, my man is a writer, public speaker, as well as an advocate for the LGBTQ community. And my man just has so much wisdom, so much experience, and he has actually, to be honest, he's probably is a historian too, to be honest, because he's been chronicling two great lives, including his own. So let's give it up for the fabulous PhD himself, Dr. Maurice Dorsey. How you doing today, sir?
Outstanding, Dom. I'm outstanding. Good to hear from you, and thank you for that great introduction. I think I'll add historian now to my list.
Yeah, I have to, man, because I took a quick glimpse of the first few pages of your most recent book of Time and Spirit, and then just saw everything documented, like all the interviews you've been on and everything like that, and of course your father's life and everything. And then plus you had the honor of writing Henry Parks' story, so I'm like, well, this historian, might as well. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So how's life been treating you?
Life is very good. You know, as I was telling you earlier, I'm retired now. I can't believe it's been 8 years. And once you get to a certain point in life, it seems like time just sort of moves a lot quicker because you come to the realization that you're not going to be here as long as you have been. So this year I'll be 74. And, you know, I'm thinking, well, I'm in my last quarter of whatever the quarters are divided up into. But everything is good. Health is good. I just got scheduled for COVID today. And so my first shot of the vaccine. So all is good.
Oh, all right. That's right. 74 years on the magical planet. Maybe another 74 years to go.
I hope not. I think my money will probably be gone by then.
You got books. This residual income.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I planned well. I don't know if it planned for another 74 years, so, but we shall see. But I doubt it. I don't want to. They say one of the quickest ways to make God laugh is to tell him what you're going to do. It doesn't always work out the way you say you're going to do it. So anyway.
But hey, it's all good. It's all good, dude. So my goodness. So that's the last time we chatted. Of course, you had the two books, The Businessman First and From Whence We Came. And most of the first interview is touching on the first book, but you got two awesome books. And my goodness, in the most recent book of Time and Spirit, chronicling the life of your father, man. So out of all the books you could have done, what really made you decide, you know what, I'm really going to do this about my father?
Well, it's a project that my dad actually wanted to do for himself. And in the 1990s, late 1990s, when home computers were becoming more popular, he bought a computer, but he didn't really know how to use it. And his intention was to write his own book. So he had scraps of paper and journals that he had collected over the years, all of his certificates, his awards, his accommodations for his work and his travel and his contribution to the community and the society and the state of Maryland and the local community that he worked in. And he wanted, I think wanted to do a chronicle of his life. So when he died in 2000, all of those papers and journals and books were, around in the house. And my mother said, well, just take that junk out of here. When they start cleaning the house, they want to get rid of stuff. And I couldn't quite part with it. I mean, it was just something about his accumulation of his life, and it did seem like it needed to be aggregated into, a summary of his life. So it was because I think he wanted it done, and he didn't get a chance to do it because of poor health and age. He died in 2000 at the age of 81 years old. I just decided in my retirement, after I had written Henry's book, I says, well, why don't I write a book about my dad? Because it's something, he really wanted to do. And he was a good dad, a good husband, you know, uh, overall. I mean, I don't think anybody's perfect. And as you read the book, you will find he's not perfect, and neither am I, and no one is. But he and my mother were married for 62 years. They had 3 children. And he climbed as an African American man in Baltimore City to a really nice position in life and in the world. And he made a home for his family, and all 3 of the children were college educated. And he and my mother seemed to work very well as a team. And I was happy to be his son, but I was not close to him growing up. It took years and years before he and I were able to build a relationship because I was so much of a mother's boy. I was the youngest of 3 children, and I'm 7 years behind my brother, but he says it's 6 years and 11 months. So anyway, so I just rounded off the 7 years, and my sister is 6 years. And so I was a little bit more spoiled, and then I was an unplanned child. And my mother and father didn't ever want my mother to work out of the home until the children were in school. So it meant that her career got truncated for another 6 or 7 years because I came along. So being home with her every day, I was closer to her in day to day and in communications and homeschooling and home education, that type of thing. But my dad was always present at the dinner table every day. And, we ate together in the old days like a family at the kitchen table, and we dined. So he was a good man, and he was quite accomplished, and he accomplished, you know, with the odds of being African American and Black, born in 1919 in Baltimore City, one of the most segregated cities in the nation. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the most, but I mean, it was quite segregated at that time. And then he attended Catholic schools, and the Catholic Church was segregated at the time where he was going to Catholic school. So, and then he had vision problems. So, he had to overcome a lot of things as an African American to achieve, what he ended up achieving. I know that's a long answer, but
Hey, it's all good. We encourage long answers here for the most part, and it's all good because it's a lot really that you really decided to take on, and it's great that you made this project number 3 of in terms of your book projects and just put it out there for folks to really learn from because we need more stories from lives like your dad to be out there because there's a lot of stuff that folks should really know about back then, especially considering the time that they were in, especially being a World War II veteran. My father too, he also was in World War II as well. And seeing his DD 214 where it had Negroid on the darn thing, I'm like, wow. I'm it's just
right.
it's just a shame where the way folks would think back then. And even though seemingly a little bit of progress has been made, it's not really much of the case, to be honest.
Yeah, well, if you look at the big picture, things have changed. I mean, my dad didn't have to sit at the back of the bus before he died, and housing became integrated, though it wasn't always welcomed in some
Mhm.
communities and neighborhoods. And the government was the employer for many African American men at that time, and the army or a school teacher was about as high as you could get, unless you were going to be, a pastor in a church or something like that, or an undertaker. And my dad was a very, very classical man. He loved classical music. He liked art. He liked the art of Paul Gauguin. His favorite book was The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. And he just was a reader. He was a thinker. And often in our home, he would be playing this classical music by Beethoven and Strauss and Haydn and that kind of thing. And it wasn't the music we were hearing out of the other houses in the community. I mean, rock and roll became popular, and, the Coasters and the Temptations and the Supremes, but he continued to play his classical music. And probably, as I would say about some rap today, I don't understand what it means, but when Motown became famous in his generation, he didn't know what that meant because he was used to Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington, Carmen McRae, singers who produced songs and you understood all of the words in a sort of flowing, systematic pattern. And he exposed us to all of that, to books and culture and art and literature. So that was an asset. And he loved Broadway plays. And we didn't really come from that background, but I kind of attribute his classical education to the classical schools. I guess the nuns, taught that kind of education in the schools, which is a good thing because it served him well. And I think it served his children well too.
Heck yeah, I can say that again. The nuns like to keep on a straight line and not just the ones in their hands.
I see your sense of humor is still intact.
Yeah, don't see that changing for a while. But yeah, it's definitely true. And it's really just probably testament how some, even though progress has changed and a lot of things have changed, like there are basically some things that have basically really stayed the same. So
We
with this
saw
one,
that in for the past 4 years, did we not?
yeah,
Not
yeah.
only have they changed forward, they changed backwards as well. Yeah.
They'd be like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's when someone does something stupid to be like, man, you just set us back 20 years. It's like the past 4 years. More like another 40 years.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
But the good news is that, hey, as with all history, it shows you some lessons to learn for the future. So,
Absolutely.
so with your wonderful father's life, what would probably be the three biggest lessons that you feel like you've gained from it? Because I know you've learned a lot from him.
I learned a tremendous amount, and I automatically know what number one is. Number one is that he taught me the word gratitude. And I was a child, and I happened to be riding with him from the military base at Edgewood, Maryland, to Baltimore, where his parents lived, but he worked at Edgewood, and I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And on the way back home from Baltimore to Edgewood, Maryland, he stopped at a Jewish bakery and bought some gingerbread for himself. He liked gingerbread and he just bought like a slice or something. I mean, or maybe a big chunk or something like that. But it wasn't something that my mother prepared in the home regularly. So he was treating himself to gingerbread. So while we were in the bakery, me being a child, I looked in the glass case and saw these little gingerbread men decorated with their little eyes and mouth and the little icing going around the head and the little feet. And I just thought they were the most fascinating little cookies I had ever seen. But I didn't say anything because with my dad, you just didn't say anything to him. I mean, you just obeyed and, you behaved yourself and you didn't question or ask. But he saw me looking at these cookies. So he asked me if I wanted to have one. So because he spoke to me, I looked at him and asked if I could have two. So he says, you will have one or none. Well, my little feelings were just hurt. I mean, I was just, because if my mother had been in the store and I had asked for two, she said, oh, get yourself 3 or 4 or 5 of them, get yourself 6 of them. She would have bought me a half a dozen of them. And that's the rapport that I had with my mother. And I think that's what a number of mothers do if they have the discretionary money to do it. But he offered one, and that was all he wanted me to accept. So anyway, I took the one cookie, but my feelings were hurt. Now, I mean, I almost didn't even want the cookie, but I wasn't going to tell him that I didn't want it. But when we got in the car and he started driving back home, he could see that I was a little pouty or a little, I wasn't quite the happy child. And so he just looked at me and he says, you know, Maurice, people don't have to give you anything in life. They don't owe you anything. And you have to learn to be grateful for what they give you. And he says, so if someone ever offers you a cookie, accept a cookie. Don't ask for 5 or 6. Well, of course, I didn't take that as my mother training me poorly. I just thought, you know, this is what parents did for their kids. But anyway, that lesson sort of stuck with me my whole life. And I think it's partly because, you know, sometimes your negative things that you feel that are negative to you remain longer in your constitution. I mean, at that time, as a 5 or 6-year-old child, I just thought he was really kind of harsh, you know. But gratitude was the biggest thing, and it has served me well. I mean, and I learned really not to ask. And if it's offered, you know, I accept. And if it's something, you know, of course, that I don't need or don't want, I mean, I don't accept it. But I just valued that lesson. The second thing that I learned was his desire for music, his love for music, because our house, as I was saying earlier, was loaded with all kinds of music from African American artists, you know, as I was saying, you know, Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton, you know, Nat King Cole, Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald. You know, he exposed us to that, but in addition, he exposed us to a number of Broadway plays and musicals like My Fair Lady and The King and I and The Man of La Mancha and To Dream the Impossible Dream, because there were messages in those musicals that I think he wanted the children to learn, in addition that he liked them. So I think music was good as something that I really valued. And the third biggest thing, which I was not a reader in school. I mean, when I complained to one of my teachers that I had gotten a C in a particular subject, she says, well, Maurice, a C is good. Well, I don't know if that was the right answer to give to me, because after that, I felt that a C was good enough. You know, I mean, I felt in getting any A's and B's because she said C was good. So I didn't have a strong interest in reading, writing, and arithmetic per se. I mean, I more or less stayed an average student, but my dad modeled in the house reading. He always had his face down in the newspaper or an Ebony magazine or a Jet magazine or the Afro or a book, generally a book. And some of the great literature by Leo Tolstoy and Henry James and a number of African American writers at the time, or poets like Langston Hughes and James Baldwin and Richard Wright, all of that he brought to the table. And I mean, it really helped my sister a lot because she was a reader. I mean, that was innate in her, but socialization and talking was my thing. I mean, I didn't need any book. I could communicate and learn by being exposed to other people. So I would say gratitude, music, and reading and literature were the biggest gifts that I learned from him.
Okay, some great gifts indeed. Some great gifts indeed. And it's so true. And it's great that he was that role model for you in those 3 different areas. And and of course, probably multiple other areas too, but those 3 areas, especially since like reading, it's kind of funny how a lot of folks who write and publish books at a younger age, they may not have been told that they were good enough to write a book, or they may not have been the straight A student, but they end up publishing books and they actually become an example of persistence and perseverance to others who still want to get their books out there. So it sounds like everything worked out.
Yeah, everything worked out. It worked out. And, and another gift that I had from both of my parents that, when I was young, I questioned a little bit, but they allowed me to be who I wanted to be. I mean, of course, they didn't want me in trouble with the law or doing drugs or anything like that, or drinking, booze and alcohol and, carrying on being obnoxious. But it certainly was a clean canvas for me to become the person that I felt like I wanted to become. And the interesting thing about that, as you're writing your relationship with your dad, which is what I was doing, I was juxtaposing my story against what my dad's life was and comparing him being born in 1919 with my being born in 1947, and how we didn't necessarily come together, because I've highlighted great things that my dad did, but there were some things that my dad did I just thought were absolutely awful, from my perspective. I mean, I was the child. I mean, and hadn't grown, I hadn't matured, I didn't have a job, didn't have any money, what C student. So I mean, I couldn't take care of myself. So you just submitted to what your parents, instructed you to do. But as you live and you grow older and then you have the experience, you become less judgmental about other people's choices. I don't know if I've completely overcome that, but but yeah.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good. That's a sign that you're aware and that you're still learning, and we're all learning together.
All learning. Hmm.
Yes, indeed. And it sounds like it's learning by choice, not by default, because the default the default option ain't always the best option.
Right. Well, it is by choice because when I was going to graduate school, and I was really kind of pleased with myself, really, because again, from that C student background, for me to be in graduate school almost seemed laughable to my dad because, he was taught in Catholic school, that you achieve and you have good grades. And my dad was a great student. He went to Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore after primary school in the Catholic schools, the St. Pius Catholic Church schools. And it was just a difference in our journeys, but yet we lived in the same household and we had to figure out a way to relate to each other. And it was just sort of late in life that I was able to do that with him, because he was sort of quiet. He was sort of stoic. He was into his world and his universe. And I think one of the things with parents that at least I didn't understand as a child is that they're working through their stuff too. They haven't fully come into their sense of place and their sense of comfort, or, I mean, just because they are the adult and the breadwinner, we sometimes as children assume that they have it all together, but they have issues inside of themselves that they have not resolved. And I think that's where my pushiness or maybe childhood arrogance or need to assert myself somewhat was railroaded, because I wasn't understanding what he was going through as a Black man in a segregated church and a segregated army, having to go down to Alabama on the bus and sit in the back of the bus and to be threatened by an Alabama bus driver with a hatchet because he didn't know from Baltimore that he had to sit in the back of the bus in the military. He didn't realize that the military was segregated. I mean, he just figured, we're one country, one nation, and he knew that segregation existed because he lived in downtown Baltimore on Utah Street. That's where he grew up, and he walked the streets of Baltimore, and he knew that there were segregated communities, but it was limited. They didn't have the transportation system then that they have now. So he wasn't necessarily familiar with Roland Park and Guilford and Green Spring and Pikesville and some of the areas that were considered more affluent. He was downtown where the Maryland State Office building was. So parents have their stuff too. So, I mean, I was sort of overlooking himself because, as children, it's all about us. I mean, we're selfish little things. I remain that way throughout my life.
Hey, but it's all good. It's all good. And it's so true. It's like and it's funny. It's like out as we age, you realize how smart our parents were as we age, and just
Uh-huh.
realizing that, hey, they're going through their own stuff too. It's pro-
Mhm.
especially in earlier times where it's like, oh, like still the financial struggles on top of just the regular racial struggles on top of everything else. And then that just leads to possible mental issues that we all have to deal with. and it's just wow, like, and then raising a child on top of that. So it's no
Yeah,
wonder.
three of them. Mm.
Yeah,
That
three
was
of them.
something else I learned, not to have three. uh,
Hey, it worked out. Ain't nothing wrong with Three's Company.
yeah. But you know what? My feeling is if it comes into this house, it has to have a social security number, meaning a job. Oh my.
Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of job, I'm pretty sure you've been polishing up all sorts of skills since the last time we chatted with your author business. So, is there anything you learned in particular that sticks out more than others in your journey?
Well, the institutional reviews, such as like US Review or Kirkus Review or Blue Ink Review, or many of the, I guess considered renowned or the strong, what are reviewed as the stronger reviewers. I don't necessarily get as much from the paid review as I get from my readers. And I have found that I really have learned so much. I've done a few workshops with the Black Writers Guild in Baltimore at the Edmondson Avenue Library, and it's a wonderful, wonderful group, and a number of writers, African American writers and talented writers who have gone on to do some wonderful things with their work. But I think character development is really very important. I find that some people recognize my mother in my book From Whence We Come very much. And one person told me they didn't like my father, and then somebody else said my mother was, she was a hoot. But then I got a comment from one of my relatives, my cousin, second cousin William Wood, and he was just telling me recently. He said, if I put all three of my books together, to make it a more magnanimous book, he thought that it would go into a screenplay. It would have more depth and volume and scope. But in that, I consider myself an outside writer in that I'm self-published versus traditionally published. And I chose that route because in many conversations that I had when I was doing my research, um, the um, the comments regarding traditional publishing is that it's still a lot of work and you still have to do a lot of your own marketing. And I figured at my age, when I started writing, I didn't have time to be going through a whole heap of rejection letters because I thought I'd be dead before the books ever got done dealing with, literary critics and that type of thing. So I do find that each of the books, in my opinion, have improved, and people have mentioned to me that they have improved, and I've been encouraged to keep writing because when you get these little small royalty checks from the publisher, you feel like, am I just a poor writer, or is the writing any good? And most people say that, the writing is fine. It's nothing wrong with the writing. It's just that 3,000 books come out every day in the world. So you're competing with approximately 300,000 books a year, or over 300,000 books per year coming out. And your book comes out self-published, and, people don't know. And it's a lot of money. I've spent a lot of money anyway, trying to have the book in international shows, that's money. Marketing packages are money. Publicity packages are money. And the thing is, when you buy a package, they last for 6 or 8 weeks. Your money is gone, and you're still getting these little royalties that you could go to McDonald's and get a Happy Meal and a smile, and that's it. Your royalty check is done. So I've been fortunate. People say if you've gotten a royalty check every quarter, you're really doing well. I mean, it's because some people say they don't get anything from one year to the next. And some people say they get coins, like 5 cents and 20 cents and $2 and that type of thing. So, I mean, I have got royalties for each quarter. I get calls 3 times a week for somebody saying, you've qualified and you've been reviewed, and we want to do marketing and take your skill and take you to a higher level, that kind of thing. But I think with my mother's book, not my mother's book, but my next book, I think I may try to procure a literary agent before I actually publish the book, because once you write a book, then you meet other writers, and other writers share their experience. And some of the people that I've met who've given me some excellent advice have been people on Facebook who belong to specific writing groups. But one of the valuable comments that I had is that if you had a literary agent to help you refine the book to make it desirable, and they write the query letter designed for the large publishing houses. So I think before I invest a lot of money in my next book, I may investigate that, because I can probably write a query letter, but I don't necessarily know what the large publishing houses are. But I've learned a lot in terms of organizing and layout. You can get an editor and pay them, and it's still misspelled words in the book. I mean, it's and it's like ka-ching, ka-ching. This is really not a cheap hobby. I mean, it hasn't been cheap for me, but it's so much adulation and people. I mean, people that I've worked with in my career say, "Oh, you've published a book," and I'm saying, "Well, yes, it's just self-published, but you're an author." I mean, they're like really excited. Do you know how many times you get to talk to an author of a book? And so, I mean, the little fan base that I've developed over the years have been very helpful. I mean, and a couple of my PhD colleagues who were chief scientists who had positions much higher than mine write me and say, "I'm so proud. I have 3 signed first editions of your book." I mean, which is, it's like pumping me up, like keep writing some more, because they're buying them. I think the only thing is that with the new technology with Kindle and Nook, a number of people are not buying hard books. I mean, if they voracious readers, they like to read on Kindle or Nook. I still like a hard book, but that's my generation. I don't necessarily like collecting them, but I certainly like having it to carry around and not have to charge the Kindle, and you're reading halfway through and then it dies, and you're right at the threshold of something you want. So I like a hardback book, but the Kindle books, they're like $2.99, $3.99. So I mean, you get 10 or 15% profit of that, big deal. I mean, that's why you don't get any royalties. And then I get calls that it's priced too much. And, all these marketers, these robo callers for authors, it's just amazing. They just call frequently. But I have learned to research them. I look at their website. I go to the Better Business Bureau to see if they're reputable. Some of these people have, that I have used. I mean, I've been taking advantage of 1 or 6 of some of these not so reputable companies in my enthusiasm to market the book. And, and they may market it the way they said they did, but it didn't increase my sales. It didn't increase my royalties. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'll never get back the money that I've put into it for some of these packages that I've purchased. So you learn to be really more discriminating, and you become a little bit more professional. And, if you stick with it, one person said that if you write, you don't really get identified until you've written about 5 books. So I really want to write 2 more, but then at that point, I just have to see whether my spirit, my energy, and my mind, and I'm happy with the writing, but I do know that I could never have made a living off of it, not being trained and educated correctly. I mean, because this was not my career. This was sort of like a vocation. And, growing up with my dad, we had a steady income because he was military part of the time and then he worked for the government. So I grew up with a paycheck coming in the house every 2 weeks. And I kind of liked that sense of stability of having money. So, I mean, to be a creative artist and a Black man in the 60s and 70s wasn't going to make it for me the way I was accustomed to living. So, that was something else I think my dad, also taught me. But one thing that I'd like to say in reference to Of Time and Spirit is that my dad read this book called The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham, and I refer to that in this book because my dad was so impressed with this spiritual seeker and whose name was Larry in the book. And he wanted to go to the Himalayas and, he wanted to do the meditation and, go to a higher place in his spirituality. And my dad identified with that. And my dad said he wanted to go to Tahiti and he wanted to live on an island. And some of those things just used to annoy the heck out of me. Why would you want to live on an island? But I mean, that was my value and I was judging him. But that was something he wanted. So he gave me the book when I was, maybe 13 years old or 14 years old to read, so that I could understand, his value of this spiritual journey into the Himalayas. And so that's why the cover of the book has this mountains in the skies, because my dad always was in this journey of a higher level of thinking. And so I got the book and read it, but there was a character in there named Elliott. And Elliott was one of the British Society's snobs, who was very materialistic. And, he belonged to all of the social sets and social parties. And he had engraved stationery and engraved pajamas and engraved underwear. And he was fashionable all of the time. And he appeared at all of the, the great parties and the great events. And so after I read the book, my dad said to me, which character did you like the best? Well, I liked Elliot. And he just was, he just threw his hands up. He says, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. He said, that is not the character of the book. You're supposed to get out of the book, this spiritual enrichment, this higher, coming into yourself, forget the materialism and the pomp and circumstance and, live this clean, pure, non-material life. Well, we clashed on that because I could not understand why this man would have wanted, our values were different. I love the socialization, the parties, the invitation, the engraved invitations. I love all of that stuff. But to me, it was a character in the book. It wasn't me. And he asked me what character I liked. But after I told him who I liked, he didn't approve of who I liked in the book. And I'm thinking, well, why did you give me the damn book? So anyway, he used Larry as somewhat of a model for his life. And my dad was not materialistic. You could trust him with any penny, any money you had. If you gave it to my dad, it would all be there. He never cheated. He never lied. I don't think in 81 years did he ever have a speeding ticket. He was very obedient. And I don't know if that was a part of the Catholic Church or the way his parents raised him or a combination. But and we were Catholic. And so he was from a family of 7 or 8 children. One died in childbirth and one died in a house fire. So, and they weren't wealthy, So anyway, he was an interesting man, and it took me a long time to understand his value of the character Larry in the book. And I still always liked Elliot as a character, and he was more of the kind of person I would have wanted to be, even though he was considered, maybe obnoxious and pretentious and overstated and overdone. And overly committed to the rules of society and social etiquette. My dad wasn't. He called all of that horse crap. So anyway, I thought that was, an interesting characteristic of his.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Yes, indeed. It is kind of funny how that works sometimes. It's like it's almost like a setup for failure. Sometimes, like, okay, so who do you like? Oh, I like
Uh-huh.
this character right here, and it's like, what is your problem? Like, but you asked me the question. I gave an honest answer.
And I'm being penalized.
But it's a-okay though. It's like you like what you like, and sometimes just sometimes folks just didn't really expect the responses that they get when they set people on a certain path.
Mhm. Yeah. And then, being an average student when, in his generation, he wanted to go to St. Emma's Military Academy in Powhatan, Virginia, and he was unable to go. So that was a huge disappointment for him. Then he wanted to become an officer in the Army, that because actually the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines were all segregated. They didn't even hire blacks. I mean, blacks weren't even recruited for those branches at that time, and the Army was the only thing. So to become an officer in the Army to him was an upward mobility, stable position, but they rejected him they gave him sterling recommendations, his commanding officers, for officers candidate school. But well, in those days it was called the War Department, but the State Department would never approve him for officers candidate school. So then he ended up having to change gears again to look for another type of career. So he became a civilian in the government, and he was able to climb over years of time with a lot of professional development, training, and an expert in his field. And then when he retired, he became very actively involved in the community and the NAACP and Toastmasters, and he got to do more of his reading. And he became a historian at the Harford County Historical Society. Jokingly, my dad was our family comedian, and he would call the Historical Society the Hysterical Society. He was always clowning around. He was quite humorous. And my dad wrote some poems that I have in the book, poems about my mother, but he was the family comedian as far as I was concerned. And sometimes I thought he was silly because some of the jokes I didn't even think were funny, but I hadn't matured to a level and experienced some of the things. So in some of the books, there's some stories and jokes in there that, he told. Some of them are original, that as a child when he wrote them, I didn't understand what the man was talking about.
Can always appreciate the good old dad jokes. Always got to appreciate them.
Hmm.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, when you're on these wonderful interviews, is there a question that you wish you'd be asked more often, whether it's about your books or anything else in the wonderful career of the good Dr. Maurice himself?
No, I basically want people to just check out the website, read the book, and comment, do a review. I'm actually quite pleased with all three of them in their way and in their form. I think this third book, I've gotten more reviews and more compliments and In fact, I've gotten compliments on all three for those who've read it. But sometimes your fan base is your family and your friends. But I did have my cousin Cheryl. She bought 10 copies of the book, gave it to give to her friends at Christmas. And I had another nephew who bought 4 copies, and another nephew who bought 4 copies, and they've a number of people on Facebook have asked me how they can get it. But that marketing and promotion is continuous. I mean, you have to really I mean, it's almost like every day. I mean, I'm bombarded with robocalls and television commercials if I have the TV on, or radio commercials. And that's the way you keep putting it out there. And sometimes I don't feel as skilled in the marketing and the promotion. I mean, because if you spend all of your time doing that, then you can't write. So that's why I'm thinking if I do a fourth book, I'd like to find uh, a literary agent. And if anybody listens to this and knows of someone that they recommend, another piece of advice that I've gotten in writing is that you shouldn't write in different genres. I read that you should stick with one genre because you get name identification and branding if you're writing thrillers or fiction or biography or nonfiction or true stories or nature. And when they see your name, they will pull it off the shelf again or buy it again because they know that what your genre, and that's their interest if they read the first book. And it also lets them know not to buy it if they didn't like the first book. But I've already written a biography of Henry Parks, and then I wrote a novel based on a true story, which is considered nonfiction. And now I've written another biography, true story of my dad and of myself. So I've already crossed over, and I understand that's not a good thing to do. But I'm learning. I'm happy. The books look good. I've gotten compliments on them. I'm getting positive reinforcement. I've done a lot of book shows, and Enoch Pratt Free Library has, I think, the first two books in their library. DC Public Library has all three of the books as well. And when we have people in our community who are in places that can help us, then they help us, and so that's good. And Baltimore County now actually asked me to come this year to speak for Black History Month on Henry Parks's book, but COVID came and it was canceled. And I've had a couple of friends who've had book shows in their home. But I don't know, the virtual thing, I'm not, in my age range, I mean, I don't necessarily feel like zooming here and zooming there and zoom, zoom. I'm a little zoomed out, but the young people like it, and they say that's the way to go, and to do podcasts and YouTube and all of these other things. But some of it I would love to do, but when I prioritize, I think I'd like to write what I'm writing for whatever reason. Part of my writing is therapeutic because I think sometimes when you investigate your inner thoughts and you put it on paper, then you get some discernment and gleaning that sort of help you. That's sort of a non-intentional exploration that you go on that you didn't necessarily give a lot of thought to in terms of organizing it in a sequence. So anyway, I'm happy with what I've done. And, I like my little website now. It's sort of a buy website. You can just buy and click, and all three books are on there. And I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Ex Libris, which is my publisher. And actually, I need to be marketing them more than Amazon because your royalties are higher when you buy the book from the publisher versus the third party. But see, you don't know that in the beginning. You say Amazon first because Amazon is what's in the news. I mean, you go into grocery store departments, everything is Amazon, Amazon, Amazon. Ex Libris is not, I mean, people are not as familiar with that, but I do put it up there now. And, and it's important to let people know that it's Barnes and Noble because they have the loyalty cards, they want to shop and get their points or whatever at Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and so forth and so forth. So anyway, it's like you said, it's all good.
Yes, indeed. Probably good with 10 O's, maybe. It's good.
Yeah.
Woohoo. Well, coming down to the magical questions for the guests who make it to round 2, and that is if you're called to give the global keynote, the final keynote address of your life for the next 75 minutes, and all 8 billion people had to tune in to hear Maurice Dorsey speak, what would the main title of that message be, and what would it entail?
It would definitely be gratitude, because I think living a life of gratitude to me is about as I hate to say religious, but certainly spiritual. And it lowers your desire to continually want, buy, accumulate, to elevate your self-esteem, your sense of self-worth. And when the work that you really need to do is inside. And often I find, and in communities that I've lived in, people buy the big luxury cars, the biggest house they can get, you know, the best schools and the best of everything. And they still, in some instances, reach a destination where they are not happy. You know, I mean, they're not fulfilled or content inside. So I think when you do your own body scan, your own meditation, your own journaling, your own writing, your own reflection, your own spirituality, however you obtain that, then you become less dependent on the outside world for fulfilling what you need on the inside of you. And I think in order for us to bloom and blossom as individuals to the bigger world, we need to have be synchronized within ourselves. And, you know, when I've looked at some of these TV shows or, you know, the little modern shows, and they say, you need to get your stuff together. They don't say stuff, but you get the drift. That's what they're talking about. I mean, we really need to be aligned, and we really don't have to be as codependent on designer clothes and designer cars and designer houses, because it really doesn't improve your self-esteem. I mean, because essentially nobody cares about it but you, because you're the one stuck with the car note and the house note and the car insurance. And I remember I had I had an uncle, he's deceased now, but I remember when my mother had kind of coerced my dad into buying a home, but my dad wasn't materialistic and didn't particularly want it. But anyway, to appease my mother and to have more space and to stay married, I guess, again, he just went on and built the house. And then it was no place for us, you know, for Black people to go at the time. So in Harford County, which is where I grew up, because it was very segregated and conservative there. And my uncle, who was an alcoholic, I mean, a functional alcoholic, but an alcoholic nevertheless. And he looked at my dad when he saw this house being built. And I guess my dad may have been looking for an accolade, but my uncle looked at him and he said, he shook his head. Now you're going to have homeowners insurance, grass to cut, snow to shovel, roof to fix, plumbing, and all of that, you know, which is exactly what my dad already knew. But he was married to my mother, and my mother was not a low maintenance lady. I mean, she wanted what the other ladies wanted: a Venetian blind and a tap and range and a refrigerator, not an ice box, and a range instead of a wood stove. And, you know, she wanted window treatments and sofas and furniture and chairs and lamps and everything, you know, that society teaches us that we need to have to feel important within ourselves. And, you know, that stuck with me. I mean, my uncle wasn't considered a valuable person necessarily because he was an alcoholic. And maybe that's why he was, because he maybe got burned out with the need to keep up, like the people around him, you know, the whole accumulation of stuff. And you look in a lot of people's garages and they're just filled to the brim with stuff. So gratitude would be my focus on my keynote, and the value of self-worth, doing your internal scans, accomplishing and thriving in tough times, and making something out of yourself out of a tough situation, and transcending adversity. I think that's central. I just think it's central to every human being, and I think it would be a universal message. And I have friends now who have plenty, but I can discern that they don't understand the word gratitude. They just don't. They just are still looking for more and more and more outside of themselves when the work needs to be done inside of yourself. And I saw an ad for once, it said, it's not what you eat, it's what's eating you, when it comes to diet and nutrition. If you're having a weight problem or an obesity problem, it's what's eating you inside that's giving you this compulsion to keep sedating yourself with more food. So I don't know. I just think gratitude, self-love, self-preservation, working with yourself, just constantly working with yourself. So there you have it. That would be my 75 minutes.
There you
And I
go.
think I could do it rather swiftly too.
Hey, it's all good because it's something that we all need reminders of. Like with this life that we have, we only go through here once, and all that stuff we get to impress people that we may or may not like that probably don't even care anyway is just meaningless. Just have to be grateful for what you have and just realize, hey, I'm already good where I am at the moment. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, but just making sure it doesn't turn into something that'll eat you for the rest of your life.
Right. Well, I saw a Facebook quote somebody put up there. It just says that you are enough. You're enough. And on that particular day that I read it, I felt like, yeah, I am enough. So there you have it, Mr. Brightman.
Well, that's what I'm talking about indeed. So for those who haven't gotten enough of the mighty Maurice himself, want to dive into the books you've written and all the other good stuff, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
www.maurice, Maurice, Dorsey, Dorsey.com. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And then if you want my email, it's mdorsey10 at icloud.com, mdorsey10 at outlook.com, and mdorsey10 at verizon.com. So you can reach me if you want to.
Woohoo! Well, there you have it, folks. Head over to mauricedorsey.com. Grab all three of his books, buy multiple copies indeed, so I can continue the great work that this man is doing to chronicle the lives of wonderful human beings. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, any parting words before we close up shop?
No, I'm good. I just want to thank you and commend you for all the work that you're doing. I can see on the internet that you're helping hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and you had a very impressive list of people for 2020. I was looking for my picture in there, but I didn't see it because I wasn't in 2020. But we'll do when I do book number 4. I'll come back again.
How's it going, you super special, awesome human? Since you made it to the end of this episode, it looks like you really enjoyed yourself. Since you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with at least 3 people in your network and tell them what you really liked about this episode. Heck, even shoot myself or the guest an email and let them know what you liked most about this interview so that way they can stay inspired to keep pushing out great work.